we have a very good professional relationship with her. We've never had any hiccups in the many years we're open with them. Not yet, but qualified.
There's always time. Stands, really not going to be that attractive looking to be looking at. Okay, my forte of public speaking isn't great, so please excuse me if I stammer and stutter a little. Dear committee, members of the Parents and Friends Association, and indeed parents and friends of those with an intellectual disability in the Monaghan area, may I thank you for your invitation to speak at your annual general meeting. My name is Fred Graham. I am currently the person in charge of, as Joe said, 3 residential houses in the Monaghan area, one on the grounds of St Davnitz, a single bed facility for a bespoke individual, Brookfield House, which is now providing care and support to 7 adults with an intellectual disability. And as Joe alluded to, I also manage the Woodlands property, which is in 3 Woodlands in the Scottstown Road, and that property is currently owned by Praxis Care. I work for Praxis Care, a charity for people with those with an intellectual disability and indeed mental health, and we also provide services in the north for elderly and those with dementia, Alzheimer's, etc. My background, I'm a registered nurse for people with intellectual disabilities, that is here in the south, and I've also a registration where I live in the north. I'm registered there that long now. My official title is a registered nurse for persons with mental handicap. Shows you how long I'm registered. Thankfully the terminology has now changed to be that of something more, a little bit more politically correct. Having worked alongside you in the provision of residential services for adults with an intellectual disability for 8.5 years now, and that is on a personal level, it is a pleasure to be able to share my experience of residential services and indeed to give some more detail in the operational management of them. The field of residential service provision has undergone dramatic change over the past number of years. How we deliver our care and support has been and is under the most scrutiny than ever before. And I just want to highlight that is a good thing. Basically what I am referring to is the implementation of the Health Act of 2007, the care and support of residents in designated centres for persons, both children and adults with disabilities, regulations 2013. The implementation of the Act configured and defined a particular approach as to how we deliver care and support in our services. Within Praxis Care, we were able to prepare for and self-assess through a framework before the rollout of the regulatory process. Having corporate policies and procedures that were derived from regulators in other jurisdictions provided us with a benchmark going forward into the regulatory process. That is not to say that we didn't experience teething problems in the onset. HICWA commenced the regulatory experience, and in turn, within Praxis we quickly realised that our governance systems required some amendment to ensure that we were compliant with the regulations. May I add, that was during the rollout of the regulatory experience. Today, in our Monaghan services, we have an exceptionally high level of compliance from regulatory inspections, and those are available online. Within Praxis, there is an open culture of sharing of these experiences. This is facilitated in formal management meetings, formal internal management meetings. So managers would get together and discuss all of their regulatory experiences, set targets from that, and then bring any changes or any amendments that are required to our governance procedures to our governance department. Regulatory compliance is a key performance indicator of a designated centre. A further key performance indicator I have chosen to discuss is compliance in the area of safeguarding. This is a particular area of concern for any relative or indeed any friend, and I admit it is a particular sensitive issue for many. When a parent or a guardian has their loved one in the trust of a designated centre, it is essential that they can feel confident that they are safe at all times. Unfortunately, it has been well publicised that in certain facilities in Ireland and beyond have fallen short of expectations in relation to the upholding of the safety of our residents, going so far as to actually facilitating abuse. Within Praxis Care, robust policies and procedures are in place to deal with any concerns that are raised in relation to any form of suspected abuse. However, that is not enough. Every avenue must be exhausted to ensure that no actions of any harm come to our residents. The mechanisms to assist with this are firstly staff recruitment. Every staff member within our organisation are tested on their values and their attitudes at interview stage and are assessed accordingly. All staff are obviously fully vetted prior to the commencement of employment, prior to actually walking in to any of our centres. Staff training, ensuring that all staff are trained on the safeguarding from the national policy. All staff are required to be familiar with policies and procedures on a regular basis, such as our safeguarding policies, our whistleblowing policies, etc. Furthermore, within Praxis Care, we provide training to our residents in the form of Keeping You Safe training. This is delivered in a communication manner that suits the needs of each individual resident. Safeguarding is a constant agenda item on both staff and resident meetings. It is an essential standing agenda item. And with a culture of openness and transparency, all incidents of suspected abuse are reported to the designated safeguarding officer who has received specialist training, and of which there is one in each of our services. Regular incidents of safeguarding screening occur, as we call it, peer-to-peer abuse. As all incidents of suspected abuse must be reported to each family member, and rightly so, as Praxis Care staff, we realise the worry and upset that a report of safeguarding concern can cause. Thankfully, most incidents are of minor consequence, and quick intervention from staff will diffuse any potential serious situation occurring. So to give some examples of I'm the designated officer within my services, if a resident comes and said another resident shouted at me or raised their voice, we immediately implement our preliminary screening. Even if we are certain that such incidents have not occurred, if it was a false accusation, we still follow the process to ensure that there's a robust investigation has occurred of any allegation of concern. This year, HICWA have rolled out a current inspection theme that is based on restrictive practices. You may have heard of restrictive practices. The restrictive practices are defined as interventions that restrict an individual's movement, liberty, and or freedom to act independently in order to take immediately control of a dangerous situation in order to end or reduce the danger to the person or others, containing or limiting the person's freedom no longer than is necessary. There are forms of restrictive practices. Firstly, physical intervention, which is the use of a physical or mechanical restraint where persons or device restricts an individual's freedom of movement, behaviour, or access to their own body. Environmental restrictions involves restricting an individual's access to their normal environment or denying an individual their normal means of independent mobility. For example, by locking doors, by using electronic keypads, complicated locking mechanisms, chairs which restricts movements, or the use of monitoring or surveillance devices such as tags, pressure pads, closed-circuit TV, and door alarms. And then finally we have chemical restraint, which is defined as the intentional use of medication to control or to modify a person's behaviour or to ensure an individual is compliant when no medically identified condition is being treated, or the intended effect is to sedate the person in order to control or manage particular behaviours. The appropriate use of medication to reduce symptoms in the treatment of medical conditions such as anxiety, agitation, depression, or psychosis do not constitute restraint. Most services do employ restrictive practices. However, our aim in residential settings is to have a restrictive-free environment. To employ a restrictive practice, it must be agreed with the multidisciplinary team. It must be agreed with the resident where appropriate. It must be deemed the least restrictive option. And all of our restrictive practices must be tested at regular intervals, and that is to ensure that they are required. They are fully documented in a restrictive practice register, and where restrictive practices have an effect on any of our residents, they are fully documented in our resident assessments, risk assessments, and care plans. Restrictive practices may uphold the safety of an individual, and in many instances are a necessity to do so. However, and thankfully, gone are the historical cultural practices inherited without proper assessment nor review that unnecessarily restrict an individual in any form. Other quality and care support indicators include being a registered centre, being registered under the Act, which ensures that we are fully regulated and that you can obtain those reports online. Within Praxis, we use an outcome-based model corporately and indeed on an individual basis. We have a current ethos derived from last year's business plan and operational planning that positive behaviour support is fully rolled out within the organisation. And all of our managers, including myself, have undertaken specific positive behaviour support training, and all of the managers in our centres are positive behaviour support coaches. Person-centred planning. Partnership working with the HSE, MDT collaboration, holistic model of care and supports, and indeed regular liaison with the families and family involvement. And I cannot overemphasise the necessity that we put on families to be as active and as proactive as much with the residents in which we care and support. To have an activity-based programmes, to have service user and care involvement and empowerment, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later. We use an everyday living model of assessment. So we have a bespoke assessment tool within Praxis Care, which assesses all elements of everyday living, and we base our risk assessments and our support plans from that, in conjunction with our residents. We have a robust untoward event reporting mechanism, and we have our escalation policies, so that where there are particular areas of concern arise in any format, that if a manager does not feel able to deal with that and feels any further advice, that is quickly escalated through the ranks right up to chief executive level if needs be. So thus far I have discussed key systems, legislation, policy and procedures around the provision of residential services of people with an intellectual disability within the community. However, as yet I have not discussed in detail the most essential element of such care and support provision, and that is the resident or the person themselves. Is the single most fundamental principle of any residential service is the involvement and the empowerment of the residents when we provide care and support. A service will never accomplish satisfactory outcomes if it cannot demonstrate that the service user's wishes, that their voices, that their choices, and that their involvement are at the heart of everything that we do. Praxis Care's mission statement opens with the word empowering, and by doing so, we are enhancing the lives of each of our residents. The voices of our residents must be heard. When it is, we can strive to meet our values of promoting independence, promising integrity, and ensuring protection. Within Praxis, we emphasise that our place of work is someone's home. To make that someone's home, they must see that as a safe, comfortable and personalised space. More and more, we are seeing referrals coming in across Ireland for individualised services, where only one resident lives in a house with support packages. This is obviously a costly, however effective arrangement. But as we know, however, this is mainly not the case. I live with my family. I choose to. We must demonstrate that we can evidence that a resident, so far as is reasonably practicable, that they choose whom they live with also. When a referral comes into and is accepted into a designated centre following a panel meeting, it is of the utmost importance that the appropriate transitioning occurs. This again is based around the wishes of each resident and, if appropriate, their representative, and is individualised and developed with that resident. Compatibility assessments indicate if a referral is suitable to the service in the first instance. During transitioning, which can occur in many forms, such as coming for lunch, staying for particular periods of the day, coming for overnight stays, full assessment is carried out with the involvement of the resident or their representative to ensure that their proposed accommodation can be made into a home from there. To assist with this, each resident is encouraged to decorate their room or area of their house, to their choosing. And as you can imagine, what we have seen is many different styles and tastes catered for, just like the rest of us in the population. Each resident is reviewed on a multidisciplinary perspective after a maximum of 1 month to determine how a new transition is proceeding. When resident in the designated centre, we have mechanisms to ensure that each resident has their voice heard, as previously mentioned. So how do we know we have succeeded? Giving service user satisfaction is key to activity being meaningful and remaining so. Through reviews, through monthly meetings with our service users, to review process and progress in the form of key working sessions. Through service user meetings. In my services, we have weekly choice workshops to ensure that each resident is involved in the operation and running of that house throughout the week ahead. Care and family meetings. Family forums. And we recently held a family forum for some of our houses in Monaghan. And sometimes it can be disappointing that turnout can be low. We actively encourage all relatives to attend that, obviously, where possible. And we need to explore maybe different mechanisms to get relatives to attend those forums. We usually hold them during the day. Maybe we need to think of it holding them at night. Through service user surveys, through our complaints and compliments process. We welcome complaints in Praxis Care. The regulators during an inspection asked to see my complaint log in one of the houses. And there were no complaints. There were genuinely no complaints. And he was quite sceptical. Why is there no complaints? You should have complaints. So now I'm actively encouraging people to complain, albeit within reason. Verbal and non-verbal feedback, and indeed through ongoing day-to-day discussion. For community living to succeed, each resident must be empowered to be an active member of that community. To date in Praxis Care in Monaghan, examples of community involvement include, and are not limited to, being active members of the library, active members, as you mentioned, to call it the Arts Club, a very worthwhile event which occurs. Residents participating in drama groups. Residents doing their own shopping. And that sounds quite a simple thing, somebody going out to do their own shopping. But by doing so, they can choose with their own foods, choose their own clothing, rather than people choosing that for them. residents availing of other agency resource, and we're currently looking into that in the Monaghan area at the minute, where our friends may have resources which we can utilise. Cinema outings, bowling, playing pool, going out for the Chinese, going out for the meal, going for coffee, and indeed even going to the pub for a pint, going to markets and auctions, going swimming, to the nail bar, hairdressers or beauticians, attending music events and concerts, and have the ability to visit family and friends, and indeed that we have an open policy on receiving visitors. We are currently working with other local providers in setting up friendship groups. We have recently had one of our residents who, through their outcome process, through care planning, wanted to get a dog. My reaction to that was hesitant, should I say. Today that person has a dog, and it's a very meaningful pet that that person has for them. We had to jump hoops, through hoops and over fire bridges to get it, but we got there because it was an outcome set. And where there's an outcome set, we will do everything within our power to achieve that outcome. It is important that each resident is afforded regular independent activity, and while group activity is, in many cases, are acceptable, the uniqueness and the independence of each resident is promoted and respected. To be an active member of our community does not just involve meaningful activity. We also must promote the area of employment and of education. And again, to date, we have residents in our Monaghan services availing of their own personal banking. And I know that has been a subject of contention over the years. We are finally making inroads in getting adults with an intellectual disability to open their own bank accounts. Pushing it so far as now we have a number of residents who are now fully managing their own finances and are paying their own purchases through contactless means with the bank. And that's a massive stride in recent years. Attending adult education classes, attending day service placements, retirement clubs, gaining active employment, and gaining necessary training and qualification. I recently again had a resident who wanted a job. They wanted to mow gardens. With that, we also must risk assess, we must think about insurance, and again, with lots of difficulty, we actually got that person qualified in the use of streamers and lawnmowers. And that person now is in active employment for a number of our centres, getting financial gain above the minimum wage for their work. We do our best in our services to represent our residents, and if necessary, we have frequently utilised services of the National Advocacy Service. We have found this to be a valuable independent tool in assisting our service users getting their voices heard even louder. We work closely with this service where we feel that independent intervention can better get our residents' voices heard. The advocate from this service has visited all of our services, and we have a very positive working relationship with them. So in conclusion, friends, we never rest on our laurels or accept the status quo, because if we do, we fail the residents whom we care and support. Continually setting the bar even higher